Right, so I've been playing Marvel Snap for quite a while now. I think I started right after the beta ended, and this opinion is coming from somebody who's mainly a Gwent player. I've played other card games throughout my life, like a bit of Hearthstone, a bit of other card games in real life, like Yu-Gi-Oh! And things like that, although that was just a casual thing, uh, without really high stakes or anything like that. And some other card games that are unrelated to collecting card games. So, in terms of Marvel Snap, it has the traditional energy system, which is available in a lot of collecting card games, where basically cards cost energy to play, and you get a certain amount of energy per turn. The best thing about Marvel Snap is that you can play every game or every match, whatever you want to call it, within maybe 3 to 5 minutes. So most games maybe last around 3 minutes, probably, especially if both players are paying attention to the game and are not multitasking, which is another strength of the game. That is, you can actually do other things while you're playing Marvel Snap. Uh, Probably you wouldn't want to just waste your opponent's time. Now, the twist in Marvel Snap and what makes it special is that each game has 3 locations, and these locations are things from the Marvel universe. In the game, they have specific abilities, such as telling you that you can't play a card here after a certain turn, or that a random card will be added to that location after a certain turn, or perhaps cards in that location gain +1 power every turn. So the locations can be detrimental and they can be beneficial as well. So just like there's a location that gives cards additional power, there's another location that could possibly give cards less power. So it just deducts from the card's power. So the locations are one twist in the game, the other being the snap mechanic, which is what the game is named after, Marvel Snap. So this snap mechanic, remember Thanos' famous snap. This is where you can use this button, which is basically a cube. You get a cube at the top of the screen, and if you press it, it's basically like double or nothing. Before I say that, I should probably talk about winning and losing. So the player who has the most power in at least 2 locations, so 2 or 3 locations, you have to win. You have to have a higher power in them in order to win the game. And every time you beat your opponent, you get a certain number of cubes, which is usually 2. So throughout the game, if you withdraw, you lose 1 cube, right? So if you win the game, you usually win 2 cubes, which is sort of, just think of it as a currency or what do you call it, a progression item. So it's cubes. And every time you win, you get 2 of those, unless you snap, at which point this gets doubled to 4. But you could lose 4 if you lose the game, so you have to be rather certain. Now, your opponent has the same capability of snapping. So if your opponent snaps as well, and you have snapped 2, this becomes 8 cubes, win or lose, which is it's a lot, right? Especially if you're trying to gain ranks and you start losing 8 cubes, one after the other. That will really ruin your plans to rank up. So this is where mind games come into play. You could, for example, snap, but not have enough cards to win, so you're basically bluffing. But your opponent thinks you've got things under control, and they just withdraw, and you win the cubes instead. Now, the 3 locations in each game that I mentioned are actually random each game, but there is a higher chance on some days that a particular location shows up in the game. Something like a 60% chance or a 40% chance. I can't remember exactly how much, but this is not important right now. So you've got the 3 locations and they're random for each game. And this significantly changes how you play your deck. So the same deck could be played in different ways. At the same time, having these randomized locations and the single location that is more likely on a certain day to appear, this actually allows you, or maybe forces you, to try other decks that you wouldn't otherwise. So if you've got a deck that focuses on getting a lot of power for a certain card, which is your win condition, you could end up having to play a deck that has a lot of card destruction mechanics. So you destroy cards to gain power or to activate other powers, stuff like that. Overall, I think the game is casually fun. Currently, the only available mode is ranked, but they say that they want to add playing against your friends as a PvP thing, and they want to add an unranked mode as well. I actually started playing this game when I was running, and it's possible to do so. Well, there wasn't as much running as it was jogging or walking while playing the game, because you do need to focus at times, especially if your opponent is really good. When it comes to progression and ranking up, there are ranks such as bronze, iron, gold, I think there's silver, and then you've got things like infinite, and I think the last one is infinite. So you've got like a certain ladder to climb, so to speak. Every time you win 10 cubes, you rank up by 1. And each 10 ranks are basically a certain denomination. Let's say if you're gold, suppose that is from 40 to 50. So if you get 10 cubes, from 40 you get to 41, another 10 you get to 42, and so on, until you reach 50, which would rank you up to the next rank. The more you play the game, the more daily missions that you do and the more weekly missions that you do, the higher up you get on the seasons pass as well, which there is a free one and a paid one. It's really the same season pass. It's just that at least half of it, or maybe 2/3, are locked behind a paid season pass, while the rest, the remaining 1/3, is free. And the free one doesn't really give you much, which brings me to my next point, and that is how generous or how stingy this game is. Compared to something like Gwent, which is my favorite card game of all time, Marvel Snap is very greedy. You pay tons for next to nothing. Let's say if you pay $20 or $25 in Gwent, you get a whole season pass that has so many things, so many cosmetic things, hardbacks, premium cards that move, which is another point that Gwent excels at, new cards that you haven't had before, and card kegs that allow you to get 5 cards each. In Marvel Snap, it's not as generous, and even the purchases that are available to buy are not really that attractive, to be honest. Now, let's get into the specifics of how to play the game. Each deck each player has 12 cards, but you don't start with all 12. The first turn starts with 4 cards drawn, so each player draws 4 cards, and then each player draws 1 card after that. So in turn 1, you've got 4 cards. You could choose to play one or not, because you have 1 energy on your first turn, so the energy that you have matches the number of the turns you're on. So for example, if you're on turn 1, you have 1 energy. If you're on turn 2, you have 2 energy. This could change depending on very few cards, but for the most part, that's how it goes. It could change depending on the locations as well. So in the first turn, each player has 4 cards and 1 energy. On the second turn, each player has 2 energy, and they'll have drawn yet another card. Third turn, 3 energy, and the 6th card is drawn, up to turn 6, after which the game ends. There are certain conditions that have the game ending in 4 turns or in 7, but the greater majority of games is actually 6 turns long. As I mentioned before, each player plays their cards however they see fit in the available locations. And the player at the end of the game with the most power in at least 2 out of 3 locations wins the game. And this player gets the cubes that are being played for, whether it's 2 cubes typically, or if a player has snapped, then it's 4 cubes, or if both players have snapped, then that is 8 cubes. The player who loses that same number of cubes. Now, if we compare this game to Gwent, I do think that Gwent is much better. Gwent definitely needs your full attention at all times. I don't think you can really multitask while playing that, at least not as much as while you're playing Marvel Snap. Games are slower in Gwent, that is one thing, because it probably requires more strategizing, while in Marvel Snap you can make decisions quite a bit faster. So in Gwent, games, instead of lasting 3 to 5 minutes, could last 10 to 20 minutes maybe. In Gwent, I think there is a greater variety in decks, because in Marvel Snap, let's say you have a deck that focuses on having a lot of power for certain cards. Another deck could focus on ruining your opponent's plan by having them discard their cards or adding cost to their cards, or, things like that. But in Gwent, it's an older game, so it would make sense for it to have a greater number of decks. And you can't really tell what your opponent is thinking a lot of the time in Gwent. But in Marvel Snap, if there are certain tells, like if a player plays a certain card, then a lot of the time, the card that they're focusing on is another specific one. So there are certain known combos. It's difficult to explain them now unless you know what the game is about. For players who play for free, I think Gwent is a lot more generous. They've got that reward book that you can unlock things with. The resources are more abundant, and this is after having the resources given being nerfed. The card art is second to none in Gwent, in my opinion. The animations in Gwent are absolutely stunning. The artists there are just spectacular. Card art in Marvel Snap, I think, is less impressive. Cards are smaller and the animations are very minor. It's something like maybe the hair is waving, or some fire is flickering, or I don't know. It's not really that cool compared to Gwent that has visual and audio interactions. Unlike Gwent, where animated cards have audio-visual flair. Gwent also has much better music. I mean, come on. If you've ever heard Gwent music, you know what I'm talking about. It's good enough for it to be in people's playlists, if I'm being honest. But at the end of the day, they're both good single-player games. One thing I dislike about Marvel Snap is that the PC client is atrocious. It's just so bad for playing on PC and for streaming. I can barely read anything and I'm already wearing glasses. Things are just so small. It's made to be a mobile game first, and a PC port is available as an afterthought. Though they did say they're going to do something about, for example, widescreen support and things like that. But there are some things that are better about Marvel Snap than Gwent. For example, Gwent probably needs more effort even while you're not playing. I think you spend more time thinking about Gwent even while you're not playing it than you do about Marvel Snap, which could be considered a bad thing. Because sometimes, whenever Gwent has a balance patch, a lot of cards change their cost and their power, and even their abilities change significantly. And so you might have to rethink many of your decks. But with Marvel Snap, the nerfs and buffs are not so... I don't think they rock the meta and they rock how your deck fits that much. Because you can still use the same cards at the end of the day in Marvel Snap, but it's just that they may become weaker or stronger. But in Gwent, balance patches include things like card cost, which they call provision cost, which is limited. So if a card has a higher or lower provisions cost, you might have to take it out or take another card out and replace it. So if you've been away from Gwent for a while, for a few months, you'll likely have to remake many of your decks. But with Marvel Snap, you can always come back and play it right away. Overall, I do think Marvel Snap is a fun game, and these 3 to 5 minute games often turn into just one more game for like 2 hours. You just keep playing, you just keep saying, I just want to rank up, I just want to reach the next rank, and you lose and then you win, and then you start feeling like you can make it, and maybe you don't, and maybe you do, and then you play some more, and it's pretty addictive to say the least. Overall, I think it's a good game. I think you should try it out. But if you like it, Gwent is a similar game. If you like something more strategic, something that has more variety, I think you should give Gwent a chance, especially if you are interested in the universe of The Witcher. Even if you're not, to be honest, Gwent is just that good. Even if you don't care at all about the world of The Witcher, I think it's still a good game to try. And, another thing about Marvel Snap is that if you don't pay and you don't get the cards that are new in the season, you might be at a significant disadvantage. Like right now, there's a card that costs like 4 or 3, and it gives you cards that cost 4 minus 2 power. I think that's pretty strong. And there are other cards like Silver Surfer and other cards like that. I think they're pretty damn strong, and you get them really early on if you pay. But if you don't, you're gonna have to wait a long while to get such powerful cards. The currencies that they give you are not good enough. They're not enough to obtain for free and get new cards. And the progression, okay, it might give you some decent cards to freshen up your deck. But I played maybe tier 1 decks for 3 tiers or 4. Which is not amazing, and I reached rather far using them. It's not like a humble brag or anything, but it's just that getting cards is much harder compared to a game like Gwent, where you can much more easily get cards in that game, and they're not as expensive. Plus, you can compete. You can compete very well with starting decks. I'm not saying you will win every match and you might be at a slight disadvantage, but if you spend enough time, the same amount of time in Gwent and the same amount of time with Marvel Snap, you'll probably win more in Gwent because you'll have a better collection of cards. Not to mention that Marvel Snap actually throws you 3 ranks back once the season is over, which means you end up fighting people who've got some cards you will never beat. Some like amazing cards. Not never is a strong word, but it's going to be very hard for you to beat them. While in Gwent, I think it's kind of skill-based, the matchmaking. So you've got a better chance there.